Hello and welcome to another BuildASoil product highlight video. Today we've got a full-blown comparison. We're going to be comparing all of these popular brands today. We went on Amazon, and if you're watching this 5 years from now, 5 days from now, there may be different brands, but I want to teach you about the worm casting industry, as most of the castings are the same on the market and they're repackaged and bought and sold through one big distributor. And then there's lots of mom and pops, and they're typically regional and they're not as easy to find. And that's why we want to tap you into Coaco, but we want to verify that with data for you so you can make a really easy decision. I also want to show you what they look like because we have a guarantee on this product. And I want to show you what it looks like so that you know what to expect when you get this. Instead of me just talking, I'm going to get into these so that we can show you the comparison that we're doing. But stick around, because as soon as I'm done taking samples, showing you how we're going to send them to the lab, I'm going to do further discussion on how to compare worm castings and points that you may not have thought of as far as feedstock, retention time, and what really makes up a quality material to use. And so that's important to me, and I really want to share that with you. If you're really looking for the best worm castings, stick around, watch the full video. We're going to go into a little bit deeper dive behind the scenes on worm castings, and then we're going to share with you the data on all of these when we get the results back. And I think that'll really help you do an accurate comparison in your mind. And because we've done so much testing, I think that a lot of what I'm going to share with you today is going to show up on these test analysis. So let's get started. First, we have the Brute Worm Farms castings. And all of these, initially when they showed up, they look great. You'll notice our two products have terrible packaging as far as like appeal for sales and marketing. And that's for a couple reasons. One, we're both home-based, like small businesses. I grew up from my garage into a warehouse, lots of employees, and then we help support other small businesses. And this is a buddy of mine. Alex and his family run this business. And so for them, this, without making a huge capital investment, they bag everything by hand and they sew it by hand and they use a premium bag that won't tear, but they didn't do any marketing because it's all about the product. Same with our BuildASoil #1 castings. These are different because these are a bulk castings, slightly more similar to what we're gonna see in these other brands, but I'll tell you why we prefer this one and why we have one grower that produces this with a consistent feedstock, and why when we get it fresh by the truckload and we know how quickly we go through it, we can guarantee this casting as well versus what may be sitting in an Amazon warehouse, depending on how busy that company is. So we also have on Amazon another really popular one, this Brute Worm Castings. They had good marketing. They popped up a lot when I was looking for worm castings, and it's a really big bag, and they're OMRI listed. OMRI listing is not very important to me, and there's many reasons why, because most of the time, any worm casting is gonna be able to get an OMRI listing. Any compost could be used for food and other things. Now, you don't wanna have human waste in it, so that's good to see an OMRI listing, but most reputable companies are never gonna use human waste in their worm castings business. So that's more for the big boys. When you see like the springtime bags for $2 or something, you have to wonder why it's so cheap. All right, so Back to the Roots was another brand that had a cool package and looked like it popped up a lot as like a recommended product, 100% guaranteed satisfaction. A lot of similar marketing across the board. And a lot of times these companies don't produce them. They buy them from a company like over here, they have their own product, but I'll explain, this is Unco Manufacturing and they're the biggest in the industry. So that's the Back to the Roots. We got the Coaco, Colorado Worm Company, local, fresh made. Then we have the BuildASoil #1, brought in by the truckload from one very specific grower. Then we have the Wiggle Worm. The Wiggle Worm is the big one in the industry. After I show you what we're testing, I don't want to take too long to get there. For those of you that are just curious about the results, the Wiggle Worm casting is produced by an Unco company. And the Unco story I was taught by Coot actually went through some trouble, maybe 70s. I'm gonna get the dates wrong, but you can look it up. They were basically preaching a do-it-yourself business model where you could make worm castings following the Unco model with a 14-day worm casting product. And they used buckets with very specific worms and a very specific amount of worm feed, worm chow, and a very specific amount of bedding. And you stack these buckets on pallets and you rotate them and you make castings every 14 days. And what they would do is they would buy these castings from you. And I think they got in trouble because they probably couldn't guarantee that they'd buy all the castings back. And a lot of people invested into buckets and worms and never really produced anything that they could sell back to the business. But that's like folklore. Behind the scenes, you can research it. From what I know about Unco, they've followed that same recipe as far as the 14-day castings. They've got a consistent process. They do have producers all around the country that have taken their courses. And so a lot of times what my expectation is this is gonna be coming from one of their clients, one of their many different operations to fulfill such a large company for the wiggle worm castings. It's possible it's all produced in one spot, but knowing the Unco model, that there's many people producing the same recipe, they're able to have a little bit larger availability, have a lower price, all of those things to really basically be like the competition crusher in the market. And so to me, this is kind of like, not the low end, but when we compare thermocompost on a farm with expensive feedstock versus a 14-day churn and burn, it's very different as far as quality. Now, the least quality, which I'm not sure if any of these are from or not, is gonna be like recycling yard waste and old mail and paper and recycling newspaper, whatever. Something very low in nutrition can still make worm castings. And so that's why we're doing this video. Is there's no real transparency out there because labeling laws are so different, and really as a consumer, we don't really know what to ask and what to look for. So it's hard to market these, where normally it's like if you're buying something like a bicycle, it has to be able to ride up the hill, or it has to go down the hill, or have shocks, or whatever you're looking for as a consumer. But with worm castings, you're like, I just want the best. What does that even mean? And so we're definitely, when you're done watching this video, you'll know what that means, and we'll have data to support it. So let's go grab the first bag that I have. And what you can see, I'll talk about what we're doing. We're using Logan Labs. We use them for a lot of testing. We use a few different labs depending on the type of test. But when we're testing worm castings, I've written up here, compost test, carbon to nitrogen. You can go buy really expensive compost tests, and they're good for analyzing a compost source, making sure the compost is finished. Many things that you would not be able to tell, maybe by the eye, some of it you might, but it's very helpful. And they go into, if you look up compost testing, it can be very expensive and goes into exhaustive properties. What we found is that more routine testing, like it was a soil test, is very good for worm castings and for formulating potting soils and how it's gonna perform with the plant for a couple reasons. Logan Labs, the way they run the soil test is they do two types that we're gonna pay for. One is the standard test, where they use an acid to basically dissolve the entire sample and tell you what's in it. That uses a pretty small scoop, and it tells you what's totally in there, not what's immediately available. Since it's organic, it should be available to the plant through some short period of time. It's small, broken down already, worked by the worms. Worms make compost better. And so the reason why we don't do a compost test is worms, when it's a finished casting and you can see that, it's typically a really good carbon to nitrogen ratio and a fully finished material. If we're worried that it doesn't look finished and there's woody material in it, then a compost test with carbon to nitrogen might be advantageous, as high carbon unfinished material can just literally rob nitrogen from your soil and ruin your grow, and then maybe next year give back. And that's not what we want. When we're paying something that's guaranteed premium price, you wanna know it's 10 times better than the other, and that it's guaranteed to work, and that you're gonna get results right away. So we do a saturated paste test with Logan Labs, where they just use water. Now you can send in your water that you're going to use at your grow, at your farm. They'll use that water, whether it be from the ditch or from your filtration system. Then you know what you're gonna use, and you can test your soil that way. For worm castings, we're gonna have them just use deionized water, so that it's a fair comparison across the board for all these worm castings, okay? So we're getting two tests, both the standard test, which tells us everything, the Malic 3. We're also gonna get the electrical conductivity, which means like how strong it is, the EC. While that's not as important in organics, it can be telling when we look at it at a saturated paste test. The other thing that's gonna have on here is it's gonna have some other trace minerals, which are really cool. It's also gonna have estimated nitrogen release, nitrogen, so we're gonna see a lot when we get this data back. Then we're gonna look how that compares to the water soluble. Are they comparable? Are they inverted? What can I expect when I buy the product? And then we'll see which ones are stronger, which ones are weaker in certain areas, and we'll talk about it. To do so, I just need to be very organized. So across the top here, I've written Wiggle, Elm, which we didn't discuss, but we bought Elm Dirt, was another one that looked like they had good advertising, kind of popular. So what I chose is ones that are likely to pop up to the average consumer that may not know and just see the flashy pictures. And a lot of these companies use paid advertising to pop up as a Google recommended product, and they're really working their sales plan with their margin and knowing how much to pay in advertising and how flashy the bag has to be. And so at some point, good products need to learn sales and marketing. But sometimes sales and marketing takes bad products and just takes a run at it. And you see many new vendors coming in on Amazon or other online marketplaces. This is how we get the truth, and this is how we've maintained loyal customers with a proof of quality for over a decade in a very volatile industry. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna take the first one, which says Wiggle, and I'm gonna open this bag and I'm gonna show you with a clear cup what it looks like, and we're gonna only use the cup per the bag so we don't cross-contaminate any of the samples. And I'll do our best to make sure this is a fair comparison. Now, I will say, I'm not trying to bash any company. We're just gonna share data. And here's the thing, these might fluctuate. So the data that we get from any of these is just a baseline set of data to make some outside comparisons with. I'm not trying to be like, don't buy this, right? I'm just trying to illuminate and share. I'm not trying to be like some crazy critic over here, bashing other companies to build our business model up. This is unfortunately what a consumer has to go through. And without spending hundreds of dollars at the lab, how would you know? So we're gonna do some of that for you and show, and maybe you can borrow some of our confidence and work with BuildASoil as you see our process. So I'm gonna grab the wiggle worm. I've got a knife here. I'm gonna go ahead and just open this bag and make it easy. Okay, and let's see what it looks like. So first I'll take the sample, and then I'll pour some more on a plate. Now, right away, this looks great. This looks similar to the BuildASoil castings. It's the Unco, what I would expect, pure black worm castings. And they use a bag that has very small perforations down the side, so it's very likely to have a lot of moisture in here, which is just part of getting better. You know, some of our bags breathe more than others, but like this one in particular doesn't breathe that much and it's packed really full, so moisture is very important as well. Here's the sample that I'm gonna put in here. You need about 2 cups to sample. I mentioned the standard soil test uses a pretty small sample size because it's designed for like farm soil that's the same, you know, very, very micronized and the same, not so much organic matter. But then when they do the water test, they use a lot bigger volume. So I wanna make sure I provide enough of each of these. So I'm gonna do 2 scoops of each just to make sure that they have enough, and if we need to run a retest or anything like that, they've got a good enough sample. There we go. Now this one is already labeled wiggle. That way I don't make any mistakes, okay? Let's throw that over there. And then I'm gonna do this and we'll line them up, and slowly these castings will move out of here and provide some room for me. So you can see me behind the camera here. I'm gonna write wiggle on here so we know which one it is on camera. So I don't use that other cup, I'm gonna throw it in the bag, and then I'm just gonna put this over here with the respective castings, and then we're gonna bag these up and send them to the lab so that we can all share the data together. And whatever we find, we'll make sure we share it. All right, let's see, the next one I have is elm. So let's go ahead and do that. This one has a tear thing. All right, this one looks similar, a little bit finer, a little bit drier. We'll show that in the photo there. Now here's the thing, this sample size, in case you're wondering, in case you're like, hey, is he doing this scientifically? Obviously we're sending it to the lab, but when I make a scoop, I'm not like weighing it on the scale because they're gonna do that at the lab. I just have to provide enough. They're gonna do the precise measurement on each test to make sure that it's very comparable. I say that just because I'm not getting an exact scoop amount. Just enough for them to test. Okay, there's the elm. And I saw this company with ads pop up for like a worm casting leachate. And a lot of times they'll just run water through like a worm bin and sell it as a product. And while it might have some benefits, I feel like it's a pretty high profit margin. And so I was curious about their marketing. Wanted to see what the castings actually look like. You know, a lot of times companies put NPK guarantees on there. This one has one, 0.75%, 0.06%, 0.05% with a 1% calcium. We're gonna see how that compares, and that'll tell us a lot. What I see most of the time is this doesn't mean much because the companies promise something low. That's what you have to do, is just put a minimum. And since many customers aren't really comparing these, it's not that great. So we'll make sure we use a real lab result, and I think that'll be really helpful. So. All right, I'll move the Cowoco over here. We'll do those 2 last. You can only fit like 5 on a sheet, so I'll put these 2 and the other ones and we'll compare on a spreadsheet later. So brute, let's do the brute castings. The knife in there. Don't cut towards yourself. It's crazy how they all look the same. All right, this one looks identical to the wiggle worm. In fact, it may just be the wiggle worm, but the lab test is gonna tell us so much more. Nice and wet, very similar to wiggle worm. Similar type of bag. So I'm wondering if they just bag them for them. If they buy the same Unco castings, if they're trying different brands. I doubt Unco would compete with itself, so this is probably just another brand. Maybe even following the Unco process, doing their own thing. So there we go, there's the brute. So now we have the back to the roots. Ooh. Okay, strong odor. First one. Now this doesn't scare me too much. Sometimes this will happen, like our BuildAFlower is a really strong odor, but it's because we mix raw amendments in, and in the bag it's sealed. and it really starts to come to life. And so that goes away and mitigates after a day. In a finished worm casting with no amendments added, I don't like to have a strong odor. It's really not bad. I mean, it's just mild, and it looks like there's just plenty of moisture in here. I honestly think it's like, if it was twice as moist, it might be a problem, but that could just mean that it did a good job. And that's part of the challenge is when you buy like Coco, it's full of life. And so some people see the little predator mites running around, and maybe even a worm or two, and they're like, uh-oh, what are those mites? And what you want is the beneficial life from the worm castings. That's a really good sign. So sometimes we just don't know what we don't know, and it can lead us to jump to conclusions. Odor is one of those where it's like, hey, it may not be bad at all, right? So I'm just taking note of that. Similar to the elm dirt, as far as slightly less moisture than the other two, it just seems like it's in a bag that has no perforation or breathing. I don't think the elm dirt had breathing also, and so that's probably why they have slightly lower moisture content, where the other bags do have some perforations in the side, which means that if it's not soaking wet, it can dry down in the bag for an old bag. So there's different models for how you might package that. All right, there we go. Getting closer. Okay, so I think that's everything except for the Coco, which you're gonna see these kind of off camera. I'm gonna grab the camera and I'm gonna show you all of these a little bit closer here in just a few minutes. All right, so let's do the BuildASoil castings next. I've got 2 more cups here. There we go. Similar moisture to the elm and the back roots, which I'll show you. Very earthy odor, smells like peat moss, which I kind of like that. Looks similar. We use a bag that has a one-way valve on it, and it keeps the moisture in here a little bit better. We don't want it to dry out when this is in a smaller quantity. It's harder to keep that moisture, where the big bags, a little bit easier to keep that moisture. And that's one of the conversations for after here. Does the moisture matter? Like how fresh? All of these things, we're gonna discuss it because some people are big on biology. Others are looking at the nutrients. And I have some theories about that. And I think what's most important, and we're gonna discuss that. These are great for high volume soil mixing, things like that, where the Coco is like super nutrient, great for top dress, good for re-amending, good for, as a portion, I like to use some of these and some of the Coco because they're so potent. They're one of my favorite castings. It's just they're a little more expensive, and so it's kind of up to you, but I'm gonna show you how the value in them is a lot higher when we get the soil tests back. Okay, there's the BAS castings, and I'll take a scoop so you can see what they look like, what to expect. Now, I've got reports of really good biology from a lot of our customers on these products. I think the Coco would probably have the most amount, but it varies, and it depends on what type of biology you're looking for. I'm always looking to add all of the larger life that's hard to come by, all the predator mites, row of beetles, and everything that makes the whole ecosystem, whereas I really believe the biology can ramp up very quickly as the environment selects for the biology. We can have tons of biology in a compost tea or in a pile, but when we put it in our soil with our plants, that environment is gonna select. And of course, we want a buffet to select from, but many times it'll activate lots of biology. Almost like when you build a birdhouse, you don't have to worry about the bird. The bird shows up to the birdhouse. And when we build good soil and good compost, it's very easy to activate the biology in that because there's so much good stuff for biology in it. So I really wanna look at the nutrient profile. Many people get lost in the microscope, but when we're continually adding this to a farm or to our no-till soil beds or to our garden, we wanna make sure we're gonna get the big fruits and all of the rewards from our work for the product that we buy, and that's very, very important to me. And we'll talk about some of the excesses that can be a problem that you may be buying versus in a product like Coco or the BuildASoil casting, we have little excess, so we don't have problems, but we have a premium amount of what's hard to find. And we'll go over that, like phosphorus, very big one. So there's the BAS castings. I didn't write this on the plate, so before I go one more, I'm gonna write BAS there. It's funny, Alex was actually just calling me from Coco. His ears must be burning. All right, so we've got the Coco. This is the creme de la creme. I'm gonna show you what it looks like so you understand for our guarantee exactly what to expect. So let me just take a plate off here so we can compare. I'm gonna write down Coco. I'm gonna take the sample. And now this takes a while to do on camera, kind of boring, but I just wanted to show you authentically that we're opening the bag here. We're not trying to make anything up. And so that's part of showing you the process. Oh wow, right away, a different looking material. It's so beautiful. And what I'm worried is some of you might see this and be like, oh, that's not like the other castings that I've purchased in the past. To me, this is a full-blown vermicompost, and it is the highest form of what to look for when you're looking for a worm casting type material. First, let me scoop this, and I'll go over what the differences kind of are. All right. Now, we have a guarantee of life, but it's just like you say something like that and people might expect when you open the bag to see like a billion little critters running around, versus when I top dress with this and when I moisten it, I start to see life come out. Sometimes you see it right on the plate. And so we'll do a little observation and we'll see what I find. The other thing is, a lot of times in a bag, a lot of the life is smart. It's gonna move like a worm bin right into the middle, as opposed to around the edges where it's starting to dry a little bit. So we'll put some of this. You can see a clear color difference. And to me, that's very, very important. But we're also looking at texture and everything else. So I'm here behind the camera now. I wanted to show you the castings, and I dumped the Coco out because I want to show you. See the color difference here? There's the Coco. Looks like a real vermicompost versus, say, the Wiggle black, like the Sedge Reed peat moss. And some people say sand, but there's always going to be some mineral. And then look at when I dumped the bag out. So they already started to move, but here's a worm right here. See if you can see that. And then right along the top, there were several worms. Oh, there's another one. And the reason I did this is they crowded the bottom of the bag where the moisture's kept from the weight of the material. When you dump it out and you look, you start to see the predator mites running around, and you start to find the worm activity. The other reason why I say the life proliferates is there's worm cocoons in here. So once you top dress with it and start to water in, you're gonna get some full-size worms as well. And so that's just a good indication that a random bag that we grabbed from our retail floor is demonstrating what we're looking for. But what customers may think when they see our guarantee is that there's just stuff moving everywhere. No, it's that it will come to life. There is plenty in here. Look at, there's another one right there. But when you open a bag, you know, nature's smart. It's not gonna be all like right along the top. It might be in there. So I wanted to give you proper expectations for what to look for, the color, the moisture level, right? It clumps a little. It's not completely dry, but it's not soaking wet. And when you look in the top there, you can see probably to the naked eye some running around little mites. Those aren't bad. Those are actually really good. And those are predator mites and decomposers. And so we can go deeper dive on that. But this is the worm casting video I wanted to show you. Now let's take a look. Here's the Wiggle. Okay, here's the Elm. Coco. Here's the BuildASoil castings. A little bit more chocolatey color than the other ones, but very similar to the finished finer texture versus this, which is the vermicompost. And then here's the back roots. And the brute. These two look the most similar. Like I said, I was curious if they're maybe from the same company. But the lab results are gonna tell us more. All right, I'm gonna send these off now. We've got all the samples done. I've already got the form filled out, so now I can include these samples in a box and send them all off, and they'll provide us results. This video will be all put into one video because it's gonna take them a week or 10 days to get the mail, do the test, get the results back, and for us to publish the next part where I go over the results. So for you, it's gonna be a flash, and then we're gonna be going over all of these results. I also wanna get into the conversation. The biggest difference between Coco, which I don't think you're gonna be able to see here on the camera, but you can see the color difference versus something like the wiggle worm is black. And so I'll explain that. The feedstock is very important. And so what Unco has done is the feedstock is the same across all the manufacturers. They use a black sedge reed peat moss, and it's from the United States. And some people like it. Some people say it has good nutrient content. When you look, it's very different than regular peat moss. So just know that regular peat moss was like ancient fresh water versus, you know, the sedge reed type. There's differences when you look up what made up that peat moss over thousands of years. And so they take this peat moss that basically looks like this. It's that black in color. And they do the Unco process where they feed them. Depends on the grower. This is why we're specific. I don't know, so I can't say anything. But many times they're just feeding like GMO grains, Purina worm chow, or things that are just not what we would feed our pets or ourselves. And maybe that's fine because it's a fertilizer, but BuildASoil is about what the ingredients, where they come from, the chemical residue that may be on there. Now, one saving grace with worms is they mitigate heavy metals, they remove toxins, and they really do clean stuff up. So I believe that the feedstock model of recycling waste and using low-grade ingredients has some purpose, maybe for landscaping and many other uses for just mitigating waste that goes to the landfill. But when it comes to making an authentic quality casting like we would want to use in a homemade potting soil or garden for our food, for our herbs that we smoke, where that could affect our lungs, I like to go with something that is not a mined material like peat moss, but is rather a very well-crafted thermodynamic compost. And so the Cocoa is very different, and that's why the color is different. And so the best is going to be, depending on your resources, right? A lot of people say, ooh, manure, I'm scared of it. Horse manure has been one of the best go-to sources for worm castings for a long, long time. That's what the worms want. But a lot of times you'll have dewormer in there, you'll have non-organic feedstock, and you won't have horses that have sun and the ability to graze. And so on the Colorado Worm Company property, they've got clean water, they've got all of these different assets from their animals, and it's all organic. And they've got clean water access right from the river. And so just all these things come together to make a very unique product in Colorado where the sun's shining most of the year. And then throughout the winter months when they need to, and to finish the product, they have a barn that's insulated. So now they have apple crates that they can stack, and they can have an exact volume of the finished compost and worms. And they can feed them premium rock dusts and sprouted seeds and things that are the BuildASoil way. And that's why it makes such a good compost. And that's why it's hard, because this family does everything by hand, bags it all by hand. It's a family business. Their process takes a long time, many, many months, if not years, from start to finish before you get the worm castings out. And they only have so much volume from their family farm. And they spend a lot on the feedstock, tractor time, all the stuff, bagging, and we have to charge what it's worth. Versus some of these other products that have an industrial operation with a whole warehouse, one employee, and it's all push button on command with 14-day castings. So retention period is something very important that makes quality castings. And so when we're looking at a feedstock that may be, not what we want, what we would really want in our compost, and a short retention time with like accurately controlled temperatures to process the worms perfectly, you're getting like the very minimum of what a finished casting is, because they're starting with a feedstock that already looks like finished castings, the peat moss, the sedge reed peat moss. And so they barely have to work it, and it looks like pure castings, when really it's mostly a peat moss product that you could buy for a lot cheaper, directly from the sedge reed peat producer. So that's very important to me. It could be that some of these are different feedstocks, but the darkest black ones, which you can see the BAS and the Cocoa, are slightly different. Now the BAS follows some of that principle. They do use some peat moss, but I think it's a little different than the standard commoditized model, and here's the other difference. We buy from one supplier who everything he produces, we buy by the truckload, we bring it in, we use it in a soil mixing line so it's not getting old, and we bag what's freshest into the bags at only a 30-day volume. That means we always have fresh material. We're not just bagging up a truckload and then getting fancy packages and then marketing it for the next 2 years because we have a high volume. That high volume and purchasing power is leveraged into the potting soil, and that allows us to have premium product that we can share with you with the BAS castings. But I will say, when I go home, I typically grab the Cocoa and some BAS, or if I can only choose one, the Cocoa, because it's just that much more nutrient dense. It's a true compost pile like Coot taught us, and I believe that's really the way, and why some of the customers using that are getting the best results. Resin profiles, terps, just everything you can think of, let alone actual fruit production when it comes to like tomatoes, greenhouse grown production. And the other thing, because the nutrients are so much more potent, which we'll go over in the tests, the compost teas that are produced from it are higher in nutrient content. And along with the biology and the nutrient content, you get a really big powerhouse. And that's why I think worm castings or vermicompost have got such a recognition that there's so many companies doing it. And I'm hoping to just cut through, let you know there's different models for how to produce it. Other models are areas where it's like year-round good weather, and they just have compost piles and worms in them, and they just go scoop and throw it through the trommel. I still think that's probably better than a 14-day casting, but it's a lot less controlled than a process where you have finished compost going into a worm bin and then finishing the worm bin and then harvesting that through a trommel. And this material is just chunkier, and some people might see a stick or two and be like, well, what's that? That is the good stuff. To me, it has all the food source, it's complete, it's not watered down to what looks like pure castings because of the starting food stock. So that's important to me. Other things that you're gonna see online make it hard to compare. Some of these companies sell them by weight, some sell by quarts, some sell by gallons, some sell by cubic foot. So you might need to do some Googling to compare what the actual pricing is based on volume. We're gonna do our best to put a weight on here and the volume. That way, we're not just like adding water to increase the weight, but we're hitting a volume and getting an average weight and then promising that to you. So when you get it, you can throw it on the scale and be like, oh, okay, Cocoa has a guarantee, the right weight's in here. And as you look now after this video, what I want to do is show you that it's like not soaking wet or anything. It's just a nice moisture. And that's what I actually like to see, because it's not sitting in its own mud, so to speak, going anaerobic. And when you look in here, very little life is gonna meet the eye, but when you start to top dress this into your soil, you're gonna see all of the different life that may be dormant in here that's waiting to just come out. And I really wanna encourage you to do that, because the amount of life that we see in this product when it starts to be used in your soil and all of it comes out of its little dormant hiding places, I think that's where the magic comes. And so you can do a test on your own, but when I dig through here, I already see little bits, but it's very hard to see with the naked eye. And so I would just encourage you, see, grab a little side amount here, to dig through a little bit. You can dump the whole bag out, and I bet you you'll find some worms and some other things as they move like to one pocket. But if you were to leave it out, you're gonna start to see rove beetles, predator mites, and other things in here. And while we guarantee life, I want you to know that it's kind of hard to see. You'll be able to find it. All of our customers are happy with their product and they see it in their containers once they top dress with it. But it's not like you're gonna open it and just boom, predator mites and rove beetles are just gonna jump into your face. Otherwise, I think we covered everything that I wanted to cover today. Biology was one that I promised to mention, so I kind of keyed in on my philosophy there. To guarantee a biology in a bag at a location for a certain amount of time, by the time it gets to you, I think these companies that are guaranteeing biology and microscope work, I don't really believe in it. And I think that it's not a good model. I believe that well-made worm castings with good nutrient profile are very likely to have a very good amount of the life that we're looking for. And like I said, when you use these living products and you have good nutrition in them and you put them into your living system, the environment's gonna select for the biology, and we have phenomenal biology products. All of them go together where I get the best results when I test at the lab what's in the castings and then understand from the chef, so to speak, how fresh it is. Where a lot of the other brands might look fresh, but they just added water. Could have been 2-year-old castings. And contrary to popular belief, a lot of worm people that raise their own worms for worm castings, they actually like to cure their castings for a little time and get them slightly drier. So there's lots of conflicting information. The test analysis, it cuts through it all. If we're trying to grow big fruit, if we're trying to grow big flowers, the phosphorus, the nitrogen, the potassium, the calcium, all of those levels are gonna become very important, especially when we mix large percentages or use lots of compost tea in our recipes. So stay tuned for the data, and I'll have that obviously after I get them back from the lab, but it'll feel like it's right now for you guys. Like that, we sent off the samples to the lab, but we immediately got the test results back. And the long and the short, which I'm gonna get into, is for the key nutrients that we're looking for flowering, it would take up to 52 bags of the average worm casting to provide what one bag of equal weight of Colorado Worm Company castings provides. Now, how's that for a hook? We were super impressed. We told everyone as soon as we found out. And of course, I wanted to record the video, but I wanted to get all the numbers in one spot because it's more than just P and K, although those are the two big drivers. When we're looking to provide the enzymes and biology that come with a high P and K casting to deliver the results for cycling for flowering. So we want fruits, vegetables, flowers. That all has to happen with the energy from the phosphorus and the nutrients that are balanced here within the castings. Of course, there's biology in castings, but let's assume that all of these are the same in biology. I know that these are thermophilic compost made on a farm with clean water, then run through the worms, freshly harvested, brought down and shipped out, and they're fresh. On top of that, each bag they put by hand a few worms into, and there's all the life that's contained within, and we guarantee it. And I, in fact, dumped the castings out in a tub and I left it here for the last week while they were sent to the lab, and I'm gonna show you some of that life. But I think these are probably better. Aside from that, knowing how fresh they are, let's look at the nutrients and let's talk about how to compare castings. Because really what you heard me talk about was the big manufacturers like Wiggle Worm, great company, but they follow the UNCO process. I believe UNCO owns Wiggle Worm, you can look it up, and UNCO, UNCO, there's some history that I mentioned about how they were teaching people to start their own home-based worm business. A lot of times these bulk sources of the same exact process and style are then aggregated together to sell them in bulk. And sometimes producers follow the process and go bulk all on their own, similar to our BuildASoil castings, which we'll talk about. The differentiator for us and the others is that we buy from one producer consistently over the last several years, and each truckload that comes in is for us, and we go through in rapid fashion. We're buying a truckload every 30 days or so that everything you get from us is as fresh as possible. And we have live humans to help you when you call, so that we can help you with anything that might be going on. And we really stand behind our products, and we guarantee them. So that's a reason why I would buy our BuildASoil castings. But they're no comparison for the Colorado Worm Company castings because they're not bulk by the truckload. I cannot buy truckloads of this. And for the average gardener, I think these are a better resource when it comes to keeping the garden going. Top dressing, teas, anything that you need to spread that biology, spread the life throughout your soil. Other people that are building soil at home, reference our Coots kit. We use the majority of bulk castings and we add 1 bag of the Colorado Worm Company, the Coco. The reason why you'll see is because of what the testing reveals. Now, instead of just being a sedge reed peat moss put into a bin for 14 days, Coco is from a farm, a family down the street, and they're using thermophilic compost that's turned and worked and processed, then finished, then put into worm bins. So it's already a sellable product before they put it into the bin and have the worms finish it even better. And then they put worms in there and we guarantee it, and I'll show you. But let's look at the numbers. So I just feel like I can't help it to be too excited about this because of how different it is. And we've known this, our customers have known this. There's people like, if you go look at the reviews, this is not just me, there are hundreds of reviews of people absolutely raving about these castings. But then there's a few where people just don't know what they don't know. They don't know how to compare castings, and these look different as I showed you. And that can cause the random 1 or 2 reviews that say it doesn't look like the other castings. And so they might leave a negative review. I'm trying to educate so you know, anywhere in the world, a thermophilic compost run through the worm bin is way better than the pure black casting that starts off as already basically casting because the peat moss looks so much like it. The sedge reed peat, not the regular peat we use for potting soil. So let's look at the numbers real quick and I'll just display them up here. So here's the Coco. And I actually put this right in the report, how many bags of castings from the average that it would, all the other brands, that it would take. Now, what's cool is on the test, we had all this soil test from Logan Labs and all the data, and then we put it together and aggregated it and then ran some formulas for averages and highs and lows. And so all of the castings, I think my conclusion was pretty correct. I believe they're all, if not from Unco, they're following the Unco process, which means it's a 14-day casting. All the numbers look very, very similar. You can use most of these brands somewhat interchangeably. There's some pluses and minuses, and that's why we're very particular where we get ours from. But for bulk purpose, when it comes to what you spend your hard-earned money though, for top dress, for teas, for flowering, when you really want to get results, let's look at the nutrients. So in green are the key nutrients that I think are most important. And so at first at the top is phosphorus. And the reason why is behind the scenes in organic agriculture, getting an organic phosphorus source that's available is very, very difficult. Here in Western Colorado, we're very alkaline, and getting that phosphorus availability to a farm that's devoid of life is very difficult. So many people resort to chemicals, and that can dilute, go in groundwater, whereas very small amounts of this material, compost, teas, and biology, it just makes the phosphorus available, and we've got proof of that. Even though a nutrient-rich casting is a little higher pH, it still is higher availability of phosphorus than all of the others, which when you know about testing, that's phenomenal right there. But let's look at the difference, okay? So phosphorus, I have all the numbers on here, but on average it was 138, where Coco was 3,233. It's like freaking ridiculous. So on average, it would be from 22 to 52 bags to 1 Coco. So now when you're comparing and you say, hey, Coco is just a little more expensive. Well, it's not 22 to 52 times as expensive. So you're getting a phenomenal value for what you're getting, and a little goes a lot longer way. The other thing is when you're only using a small amount of Coco to get these numbers, 52 times as much on phosphorus, it's in a balanced way. It's got a higher cation exchange, and what we noticed is when we look at the saturated paste test, it's slightly lower or the same as the others, meaning in soluble salts, what could potentially burn your plant, it's very gentle. So the Coco is nutrient packed, but it's also gentle. So don't be scared that these higher numbers are gonna hurt you. They're balanced and they're slow release. And the key is when it's higher phosphorus, what you're getting for free is more enzymes that made that, the phosphatase enzyme, and that's gonna help cycle it. So much so that we have a product from Rootwise called BioPhos that helps. A lot of people pair the two together, Coco and BioPhos. But just out the gate, Coco is just dominating on phosphorus. The next one is K, which is potassium. All of the flowering food you see at the hardware store will be higher in P and K. At the hydro shop, the bloom boosters, all PK boosters. And then typically what they have to sell you with is like CalMag, because you end up spiraling out of control, where In organic castings like Coco, it's all balanced, so you don't have to worry. But the K on average was 344, where Coco's 58.94. And so what we're looking at is a bag difference of 16 bags to replace on the low end, up to above 52 bags to one Coco. So when it comes to PK, Coco's the way. It's not even comparable because it's not even double the price, let alone 52 times the price. And I just think that this is so important because it's black and white comparison. That's so much easier to see than it is like, hey, there's worm castings with a fancy label. Here's worm castings with no label. How do I know which one's better besides trusting BuildASoil, which a lot of people do? I feel like it's better placed if you're educated, and then you don't really have to trust me. You can hold me accountable, and that gives us more longevity in business because it's easier for you to verify that what we're doing is true instead of me trying to pull the wool over your eyes. So next on the nutrient list, calcium is a big one. And on here, Coco is the highest, 7,500, where the next highest, I believe, was 64. So a lot higher in calcium, which is important because calcium you really want to go with, okay? And then magnesium is on here as well. Magnesium, let's see, Coco is 1633, where the other nearer one on average was 959. So a lot more magnesium, and that's good because you want them to be somewhat in balance here. And so we've got that covered in the Coco. But what I'm really wanting to look at for the money's worth and compared to these other castings is gonna be the micronutrients that come along with. So boron, you'd have to buy another product usually, and it's a driver of calcium, and it's part of this entire process, and it's important, and that is much higher. So boron, 1 to 1.5 bags just to replace the boron. So it's like 150% more, which is significantly higher. When we go to the next one, manganese, it takes like 10 bags to replace the Coco for manganese. And so manganese is another important one, and it's helpful for flowering. I have some of these listed on here at the bottom with some notes, which you can see when you go download it. And then let's see, I've got copper, okay? And so you can see all these numbers. It would take 15 bags on average. So this one is, let's see, 1.5, I'll just do the high numbers, 10.8 on manganese bags. Zinc, it would take another 10 bags. Oops. Copper, it would take 15 bags. And zinc, it would take 10 bags. And so when it comes to micronutrients, PK, calcium, magnesium, all the things that we're looking for, the Coco is absolutely the way to go, and it's a much better value, much better bang for the buck. Last but not least, I'm just gonna wrap this up, and then I'm gonna grab the camera and I'm gonna show you what I did. We actually took the worm bin, or sorry, the bag of Coco, and since we guarantee the life in there, I want you to know what that means. It's not like you're gonna open it and find a worm farm. We're trying to ship it to you, and it's gotta be balanced, and it's gotta be economical for the worm farm. But there's things that the small family can do. They can throw a few worms in there, they can make sure it's fresh. All of these things help compete with the big boys. And so let me show you what we did. I actually took the castings and I threw them in a tub and I fed it a little kashi, and this stimulated the worm growth. And you can see, even from there, you can see the castings that are all over the sides of the bin. That's from all the worm activity at night when it's dark in here. But oh wow, look at that. So they're along the sides, which you can see because of all the activity along the side. So this is some of the kashi that we fed, and so clearly they were targeting it, and that brings them out. And so if you just open a bag, you may not see all of the worms that are in it right away and the cocoons, but as soon as you put it in the dark and put a little moisture in there and stimulate it, you can see all the activity that's happening. Let's see if I can find, there's predator mites running around. I just think it's too difficult to see on camera. So let's see what I can find. So there's some, that's what I'm hoping to show you. Is some of the movement there. Do you see any of the predator mites moving around? You'll see little bits of movement there. That's the life that we're looking for. Obviously there's pot worms, there's regular worms, and this has been sealed up and there are no fungus gnats in here at all, which can be a huge issue. This is a small family operation and they're not like recycling waste, and so we don't see those problems. Little predator mites running around. That's what we're hoping to share with you. And for the average person, they might see this and go, man, look at that little stick. That's not pure worm castings. And they might miss this, where it would take 52 bags to replace what this has for your garden. Thank you very much for watching these videos. It's important that we find a way to cut through all of the marketing that's going to be done out there to say you're going to quadruple your yield and just bullshit statements, and share factual information that you can go research on your own. And in doing so, I hope that we develop trust together. The other thing that I'm looking to do is take family brands that it's putting food on the table, providing small local jobs, and put them on a pedestal and show why they're different, because it takes a lot of research for the average person to understand why it's different. You know, they don't have all this equipment. They're doing everything by hand, and it's a significantly better product. And that's the artisanal approach that BuildASoil is after. Anytime we can share that with you, we're going to. And so again, thank you for watching the video. And if the Kooko have helped you, if you have seen the benefit of these, please tell everyone. It helps the small businesses succeed against the big guys with the big marketing budgets.